Shout out to Kieran. Occasionally, I get people asking me who I think the best heavyweight in the world is. And the answer that they get is always the same. I don't know who the best heavyweight in the world is. I've actually got no idea. And so they press me on the issue. They say, oh, you must have some idea. You must have some inkling about who you think the best is. Well, why must I? Do you want me to lie to you and pretend as though I know who the best is or have some kind of inkling about who the best is? Would you prefer me to lie to you? Because that's what I would be doing if I came out and told you that I've got some idea about who the best heavyweight in the world is. The truth is, I've got no idea. One of the reasons that I've got no idea is because I'm a student of heavyweight boxing and because I pay attention. Several years ago, I started seeing signs that we were about to move into a new golden age of heavyweight boxing. I started seeing the emergence of a lot of new talent, which was absent during the Klitschko era. New talent who are 21st century sized heavyweights, very big men with a lot of talent. But along with that, big men who are vulnerable. And so you had all this talent coming through, which was absent during the Klitschko era. Vulnerable talent. Well, that's going to be a recipe for fireworks. But it's also going to be a recipe for chaos. And that is one of the characteristics of these golden ages of heavyweight boxing. The 1990s, which I've gone on about until I'm blue in the face, was an era that I lived through. It was chaotic. The 1970s, the previous golden age of heavyweight boxing, was also chaotic. I'll give you some examples. In the 1960s, Sonny Liston was the heavyweight champion. Many people believed that Sonny Liston at the time was invincible, that nobody was going to beat Sonny Liston. Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was then, went into the Liston fight as a big underdog. So at the time, it was settled. Liston's the best heavyweight. There's no more to it. In comes Cassius Clay, beats Sonny Liston, and in the words of Clay himself, I shook up the world. He did shake up the world because nobody expected that, or very few people expected that. So all of a sudden, people's perception of who the best is was turned on its head. Some people couldn't believe that Cassius Clay was the best. They thought it was some kind of fluke and that Liston would rectify it in the rematch. Well, the rematch happened. Liston got stopped in the first round. Then he changed his name. Well, he changed his name after the first Liston fight, I believe. But he went on to be Muhammad Ali. He had a run as heavyweight champion in the 60s. Then there was the controversy with the Vietnam draft. Ali went into exile. And in the interim period, you had a short period of heavyweight chaos where there were multiple different people claiming to be the heavyweight champion. Jimmy Ellis, Joe Frazier, etc. It was eventually settled. Frazier became the champion, at least in terms of the active fighters. But then there was the whole Muhammad Ali question. So when Muhammad Ali came back, there was speculation. Who's the best? Is it Frazier or Ali? We don't know. When Frazier beat Ali in that first fight, okay, it's settled. That's it. Frazier's the best. We know who the best is now. All done and dusted. You know, we can put that one in the bank. We know who the best is. But all along, while people were declaring Frazier as the best, they were ignoring the fact that Frazier was vulnerable. They were ignoring the fact that Frazier had been on the floor. Oscar Bonavena put him on the floor. This is a guy who'd been hurt in several fights. And on his undercard, on Joe Frazier's undercard, was a young heavyweight contender called George Foreman, who'd been fighting on Frazier's undercards. So all the while, people were thinking, okay, heavyweight division settled. Frazier's the best. He beat Ali. That's it. Nobody can touch him. He ends up fighting George Foreman. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what the odds were for that fight, but I seem to remember, and I wasn't around at the time, but I was a fan of 70s heavyweight boxing because that's what got me into boxing. I was given videotapes and stuff like that in the 80s of the heavyweight era in the 70s, okay? So, off the top of my head, to the best of my knowledge, Frazier was the favorite going into the Foreman fight. Foreman wipes Frazier out in 2 rounds, turns the heavyweight division on its head. Now everybody has to reassess and reevaluate. Well, we thought Frazier was the number one, who he's clearly not. It's clearly Foreman. He must be the number one now. Remember, Frazier has beaten Ali. Another man who beat Muhammad Ali was Ken Norton. Foreman goes in against Ken Norton. Well, he beats Joe Roman first, then he fights Norton. Knocks Norton out in 2 rounds. At that point, it's pretty much right the way across the board. The consensus is George Foreman is the best heavyweight out there. Nobody's beating this guy. Then Muhammad Ali, a guy who'd been in the wilderness for years. I mean, by the time Ali fought Foreman in, when was it, 74? Ali hadn't been champion since the 60s. So he'd been in the wilderness without a world title belt, and he'd suffered losses, and he'd been in tough fights for, what was it, 6-7 years or something by the time he fought George Foreman? Maybe 5, I don't know. It was a long time. It was a period of at least 5-6 years between when Ali was stripped of his world titles and when he finally regained them against George Foreman. So in the midst of all that, how many people would have said, oh, Ali's the best heavyweight. He's going to go down as, you know, the best heavyweight of this particular era. Very few people would have predicted that. Understandably so, because it looked at the time as though Ali wasn't going to go down as the best heavyweight of that era. He'd been whooped by Frazier, had been whooped by Foreman. Yeah, he got it back against Frazier in the rematch before the Foreman fight, but still, not many people felt like Ali would go down as the best heavyweight of that era. We can look back now in retrospect and say, oh yeah, Ali was the best. He had the best resume. He beat everybody. But in the middle of all that chaos, it wasn't that clear. It was all up in the air. People's perception of who the best heavyweight was changing year by year. See, boxing fans are so reactionary. They want to know who the best is now. Sometimes you got to be a bit patient and wait and see. Let these guys fight each other and we'll find out who the best is down the line. In the 1990s, the era I know far better because I lived through it, it was chaos. We had to wait over 10 years to find out who the best heavyweight was of the 1990s era. Yeah, we had to wait over 10 years. At the start of the 90s, Mike Tyson gets knocked out by Buster Douglas in a fight which is still considered to be the biggest upset in history. Holyfield then comes and beats Buster Douglas. So it's up in the air. Is it Holyfield or is it Tyson? Because there was still a lot of people who felt like Tyson was the best heavyweight in the world, even after Holyfield beat Douglas. Okay, so let's see Tyson and Holyfield fight each other. Let's find out who the best is. Holyfield had a defense against George Foreman. He was supposed to fight Tyson next, but he fought Burt Cooper instead. Tyson went to prison. Holyfield was supposed to fight Damiani. Damiani got injured. In stepped Burt Cooper, who was a journeyman and a late substitute replacement. Cooper nearly knocked Holyfield out in that fight. So there was even more ambiguity then about who the best was. In fact, most people at the time were saying, well, it must be Tyson. But Tyson was now on trial or he'd gone to prison by that point. So you got Holyfield, who was looking very vulnerable, who's nearly taken out by a journeyman in Burt Cooper. Tyson in prison. How long's Holyfield going to be champion for? It was up in the air. Holyfield then had an unimpressive performance in beating Larry Holmes. He then fought Riddick Bowe in a classic, an all-time heavyweight classic. Riddick Bowe beats Holyfield in that fight. Then, after the Bowe-Holyfield fight, all of a sudden, the press, the Ring Magazine, KO Magazine, all the boxing publications are saying, okay, Riddick Bowe's the best. We know now. This is a guy who legitimately could take on Tyson and have a good chance of beating him. Holyfield's too small. He's a brave guy, but he ain't going to beat Tyson. Look what Cooper did to him. This is what people were saying at the time. This is what the boxing press was saying at the time. This is what most of the public was saying at the time. They were writing off Holyfield's chances against Tyson. When we look back in retrospect, how ironic that was, right? But at the time, people were writing him off of having any chance of beating Tyson. And they're saying Bowe's the only guy who has a good chance of beating Tyson. They were acting as though Bo against Tyson was almost 50-50. Bo has a couple easy defenses against Michael Dokes and Jesse Ferguson. Then he fights Holyfield in the rematch. Most people are expecting Holyfield's going to get beaten in a rematch again. But no, Holyfield turns the heavyweight division on its head and he beats Bo in the rematch. So it's even more chaos. Now, we thought Bo was the best. Now Holyfield's coming back and beat him. Oh my God, who's the best? Boxing fans are so reactionary. They have no patience to just wait a few years. Then you won't have to speculate about who you think the best is. Just wait a few years. All these guys are going to fight each other. You'll find out who the best is. You don't have to be changing your mind about who the best is every week. every other month, because that's what was happening in the 90s. People were having to change their mind about who the best was every other month because upsets kept happening. And that was an upset right there. You had the upset of Tyson Douglas. You had the upset of Bo Holyfield. Actually was an upset. It wasn't a massive upset, but Holyfield going into the fight, if memory serves me right, was a marginal favorite against Riddick Bowe. So that was a little bit of an upset. A bigger upset was when Holyfield beat Bowe in the rematch. Most people did not expect that. They expected Bowe to do the job quicker against Holyfield second time around. Holyfield turned it on its head. Wow, okay, maybe Holyfield's the best. I don't know. This is what people were thinking then. Then Holyfield defends his title against Michael Moorer. Holyfield being the favorite in the Michael Moorer fight. And Moorer beats him. So it's even more chaos then. I mean, when is this going to end? Why can't the heavyweight titles stay with one person? It was just all up in the air. It was chaos. Then Michael Moorer defends his world title against an ancient George Foreman. He's beaten the living crap out of Foreman through 9.5 rounds. Then in the 10th round, Foreman lands a couple of right hands. Down goes Michael Moorer. Foreman becomes the oldest heavyweight champion in history. More chaos. And in the midst of all that chaos, by the way, there was other chaos going on with the other belts, because when Riddick Bowe became heavyweight champion, he was mandated to fight Lennox Lewis, who was then the WBC champion. WBC mandatory. Lewis beat Razor Ruddock for that position. But rather than fight Lewis, Riddick Bowe threw the WBC belt in the trash. Lewis then became WBC champion by default. He went ahead and fought Tony Tucker, Frank Bruno, Phil Jackson. And during that time, you also had the WBO champion, Tommy Morrison, who Lewis was scheduled to fight. I spoke about this in a recent video. Lewis was scheduled to fight Morrison in the unification WBC WBO. Morrison ended up getting knocked out in one round in a tune-up fight against Michael Bentt. Chaos again. Lewis missed out on a massive payday. So you had certain people saying, oh, Lewis is the best at this point. Other people saying, no, Bowe is the best. Then Bowe gets beaten by Holyfield. No, Holyfield's the best. Then Holyfield gets beaten by Moorer. Okay, maybe Moorer is the best. Then Moorer gets beat by Foreman. Oh, God, we don't know who the best is now. You see how futile it is to be declaring a particular heavyweight as the best amidst all that chaos? It's futile. Then you had Lennox Lewis getting knocked out by Oliver McCall. Then your head's really in a spin then. Well, who's the best now? It's chaos. How many people? Because right now, in 2019, the general consensus is that Lennox Lewis was the best heavyweight from the 1990s. There is some people who would argue that it was actually Holyfield. Okay, but between them two, Holyfield and Lewis, most people saying Lewis was the best heavyweight of the 90s. And again, the fact there's still some debate about who it is just shows you how chaotic heavyweight boxing can be in these golden ages. But at the time when Lewis lost to McCall, how many people would have stood up and said, Lewis is the best heavyweight of this era? I mean, you probably would have been sectioned after Lewis lost to McCall if you would have stood up and said that. But when we look back now, we say, okay, well, yeah, Lewis probably on reflection went down as the best heavyweight of the 90s, either him or Holyfield. It didn't look like that at the time. Boxing fans are too reactionary. They don't want to wait and find out. They don't want to wait a few years, let all these guys fight each other, and then we don't have to speculate. We can see who ends up at the top of the pile once the smoke clears. Yeah? People just don't have the patience. So, Lewis is in the wilderness for a number of years after he loses to McCall, manages to get back a win over McCall for the vacant WBC belt, becomes the champion again. Tyson obviously had come out of prison amidst all this, and people were saying, okay, now Tyson's the best. He's out of prison. His mind is right now. He's focused. Nobody can beat him. He's the best. Is he? He knocked out McNeely in 1 round, knocked out Buster Mathis in, 3 rounds. Knocked out Bruno in a rematch. Knocked out Bruce Seldon. At this point, everybody is saying Mike Tyson's the best. That's it. Settled. Tyson's the best. He's going to destroy all these guys. He's going to destroy Holyfield. He's going to destroy Lewis. He's going to destroy Bo. That's it. It's Tyson. He's the best. What happens to Tyson? He goes in there with Holyfield, who's supposed to be washed up at the time. He's coming off a layoff and a heart condition and a stoppage defeat to Bo in the 3rd fight. Well, what happens? Holyfield knocks Mike Tyson out or stops him in 11 rounds in one of the biggest upsets in boxing history. He was like a 25-1 underdog in that fight. As big an underdog as Andy Ruiz was against AJ. Turns the heavyweight division on his head. Oh God, now we're totally lost. What was going on? We thought Tyson was the best. Well, he'd never fought Holyfield. They were supposed to fight back in the early 90s. When Tyson fought Douglas, he was supposed to fight Holyfield right after. And that was in February 1990. After Tyson's jail stint, comes out, does what I described. Then he eventually got to fight Holyfield. Everybody assumed, including me, that Tyson was going to run through him like a hot knife through butter. But they hadn't fought. This wasn't some journeyman. This was a top heavyweight in Holyfield. Former heavyweight champion, former cruiserweight champion. This wasn't some cupcake. I learned from that situation there. That there were certain things stylistically that Holyfield had, which Tyson had never faced before. And also in terms of mental fortitude. Also, it was the case that Holyfield had been studying Mike Tyson for his whole career. Ever since the amateurs, Holyfield had been obsessed with Tyson and studying him. Holyfield turned the heavyweight division on his head with his win over Mike Tyson. Nobody saw that coming. But yet so many people at the time were ready to say, Tyson's the best, that's it. It's settled. He's the best of the 90s. End of. Well, no, he wasn't. He got turned over twice in the 90s by Douglas and then by Holyfield. So now Holyfield's the best. Okay, well, Holyfield's the best. But then Lewis puts a little run together with his WBC belt that he's regained. And then there's speculation, okay, maybe Lewis is the best. It's either Lewis or Holyfield. That's what people are saying then. Particularly after Lewis knocks out Golota, a guy who'd given Riddick Bowe a beating twice. Yeah, because then Bowe was still kind of in the equation. But after he got battered by Golota twice, even though he won by disqualification both times, they were essentially losses because he took a terrible beating both times. So people were looking at Lewis Golota and they're saying, okay, it's either between the winner of this fight and Holyfield in terms of who the best is. Then Lewis and Holyfield fought. The first fight was very controversial, a draw. Most people feeling as though Lewis won handily, but he got robbed on the cards in the United States. The second fight was actually much closer. Many people saying that fight could have gone either way, but because Lewis got robbed first time around, people say that he was given the benefit of the doubt by the judges and they awarded him the victory in the second fight, which was actually very close, much closer than the first fight. So after that, they say, okay, Lewis is the best. We finally got there. We've finally established who the best heavyweight in the world is. But no, there were some people still saying, you know what? Mike Tyson, despite losing to Holyfield twice, he's got what it takes to beat Lennox Lewis. Because although Lewis beat Holyfield and he beat all these other guys, they can't punch like Tyson. And Lewis is chinny. This is what people were saying at the time. See, Holyfield don't hit hard enough to get Lewis out of there, but Tyson does. So let's see Lewis Tyson. That's still an unanswered question. Maybe Tyson can knock this guy out. We've seen so many upsets in the heavyweight division. We've seen our perception about who the best is turned on its head multiple times. Well, maybe that's going to happen again when Tyson beats Lewis. This is what people were thinking. So Lewis has defended his title. He's beaten Francois Botha. He's beaten David Tua. He's beaten Michael Grant. He's looking impressive. Then he comes up against Hasim Rahman in what is supposed to be a routine defense. He's out there in South Africa meeting Nelson Mandela and all this kind of business. It's supposed to be a routine defense. Lewis ends up getting knocked out with one punch by Oliver McCall in the 5th round. By Hasim Rahman in the 5th round. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Once again, the heavyweight division is turned on its head. Who's the best? We don't know. It must be Tyson now. Yeah, this Rahman guy's obviously knocked Lewis out, but Tyson's better than this Rahman. He'll beat Rahman and he'll beat Lewis. So it's Tyson all along. You see what I'm saying? It's chaos. Lewis comes back, beats Rahman. Still a lot of people feeling like Tyson can beat him. Lewis then goes in and beats Tyson. Okay, finally, we settled it. Lewis is the best. Is he? Then he fights Vitaly Klitschko, this young, upcoming former WBO world champion. Lewis goes life and death with Vitaly Klitschko, the upcoming guy. Says he'll give him a rematch, but doesn't. Retires instead after getting a TKO win. A well-deserved, legitimate TKO win, but a TKO win in which he went life and death. So even at the end of Lewis's career, there was still ambiguity about, is he really the number one heavyweight in the world right now? I mean, the only solace that Lewis really has is the fact that Klitschko is really seen as a heavyweight of the next generation, not really being of Lewis's generation, but being of the newer generation. So most people would say, okay, of Lewis's generation, he was the best heavyweight, either him or Holyfield of the 90s, Obviously, Lewis versus Tyson and Lewis versus Klitschko happened in the early 2000s. But then we move on to today's heavyweight era. You got people out here, come on, Hatman, you must have an idea about who the best heavyweight in the world is. Have you just listened to what I've just described about the previous heavyweight eras? I've learned from that. Do you understand? If you don't want to learn from that, if you want to be reactionary and not understand that history repeats itself, you go ahead and do that. But don't expect me to not pay attention to heavyweight history and what's gone on before. Don't expect me to be so quick to declare this fighter or that fighter to be the best heavyweight. No, I know better than to be doing that. I look at all the heavyweights around today, AJ, Andy Ruiz, Joseph Parker, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, Luis Ortiz, and I can see that all of them have got vulnerabilities. I mean, all of the top heavyweights, certainly most of them, have been on the floor. Tyson Fury has been dropped heavy numerous times. He was dropped heavy by Nevin Pikage, dropped heavy by Steve Cunningham, dropped heavy by Deontay Wilder. There was even a fight where a journeyman wobbled him. Tyson Fury's vulnerable, man. AJ's been on the floor a bunch of times against Andy Ruiz, wobbled against Dylan White. Deontay Wilder got dropped by a journeyman early in his career. Deontay Wilder has struggled in fights. I mean, did you see him struggle against Artur Spilka for 9 rounds? All these guys are vulnerable, man. How am I going to come out and say, oh yeah, I think this guy's the best. That's it. They haven't all fought each other yet. Let them fight each other. They all exist in the same era. And because they all exist in the same era, the likelihood is they're all going to fight each other. Anthony Joshua has got a better resume than Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder. But that doesn't mean that Anthony Joshua is the best heavyweight in the world, because we just seen him get spanked by Andy Ruiz. So yeah, he might have more high-level wins than Fury or Wilder, but it doesn't mean that he would beat either of those guys. So even when it comes to assessing somebody's resume and saying, okay, he's the best based on his resume, at the moment, there are far too many fighters out there who all of the top heavyweights haven't fought to really pay too much attention to the resume, at least Not to the point of saying, okay, he's the best because he's got this resume. No, there's so many styles he hasn't fought. So many questions he hasn't answered. So many boxes he hasn't ticked. I mean, AJ might be a write-off now after he's lost to Ruiz. Or perhaps he'll go on to be the best. I don't know. That's what's so exciting about it. I've got no idea. Maybe Tyson Fury will go on to be the best. Maybe he won't. Maybe he won't be consistent enough. Maybe Wilder will clean him out in the rematch. Maybe he'll school Wilder in the I mean, God knows. Maybe he'll have a rock, paper, scissors situation where Fury beats Wilder, Wilder beats AJ, AJ beats Fury. Maybe that'll happen. I've got no idea. I am somebody who's perfectly happy to be patient and just let it all unfold. And then once the smoke has cleared, then we can see who is at the top of the pile 4 or 5 years down the line. For me, there's no reason to be jumping out the window and guessing. I don't want to guess. If I'm going to guess, I want to take an educated guess. But right now, I can't even make an educated guess. There's too much chaos. There's too many unanswered questions. I've got no idea who the best is. No idea who's going to be at the top once all the smoke clears in a few years' time. Absolutely no idea. It might not even be any of the top three. Have you considered that? It might not be Fury, Wilder, or AJ who emerges as the best of this era. It might be Hrgovic. Imagine that. It might be Dubois. I mean, we don't know who's going to emerge as the best for sure. So let's allow it to unfold. As I've already mentioned, all of the top guys have been on the floor. Parker's been on the floor. White's been on the floor. Fury's been on the floor multiple times. AJ's been on the floor. Wilder's been on the floor. I mean, how many divisions in boxing can you name me where so many of the top fighters have been on the canvas? You can't say that about the middleweight division. The two top middleweights have never been decked in their whole career as professionals. Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez have never been on the floor as pros. Yet in the heavyweight division, all the top guys have been on the canvas. Heavyweight boxing is notoriously unpredictable and chaotic. When you have one of these golden eras, it's so chaotic. Well, why are you trying to jump out the window and act as though you know how this chaos is going to unfold and how this chaos is gonna reorganize? Why are you jumping out the window pretending like you know that? You don't know. You're being extremely reactionary. Have some patience. I mean, look, I'm going to have patience. If you don't want to have patience, that's your business. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to wait and see. I've been saying for several years now to expect the unexpected in this heavyweight era. That all these guys are going to lose. Fury's going to lose. Parker's going to lose. AJ's going to lose. Wilder's going to lose. I was predicting for them to all lose when they were still unbeaten. How about that? That's a fact. I'm predicting chaos. I don't know who's going to emerge as the number one guy after all the smoke clears. I don't know. I'd be lying to you if I told you I have some kind of idea in my head about who it's going to be. I don't have any idea. All I'm expecting is the unexpected. More upsets like we saw with Ruiz. More chaos. More ambiguity. More excitement. So I'm happy to just sit back and let it all unfold. And 4 or 5 years down the line, minimum, we'll get a better idea about who the best is. Right now, come on. Tyson Fury's had 2 world title fights in his whole career. And people are saying, oh yeah, he's definitely the best. How? He's not the best based on resume. He hasn't got a better resume than AJ. So you can't say he's the best based on resume. He's only had 2 world title fights his whole career, a win and a draw. So people saying that Fury's the best, they're basing it on what they think he can do. Not on what he's actually done. What they think he can do. 2 world title fights, that's it. 2 top heavyweights in his whole career. There's loads more than 2 top heavyweights out there, people. In case you hadn't noticed. There's loads more styles than Wilder and Klitschko for Tyson Fury to contend with. I mean, one of the things I've mentioned in recent videos is I'd be interested to see Tyson Fury in with a mover again. Because the last time Tyson Fury was in with a mover, it was Steve Cunningham. He got dropped in that fight. He went life and death in that fight. We know Tyson Fury likes big clunky guys to come towards him. What about when he's in with a guy who moves away from him? A little guy who's faster than him, who's fleet of foot, who's got better balance than him? Like a Usyk. How does Tyson Fury react? We don't know. I don't know. I'm intrigued to find out. Maybe he could deal with it. Maybe he couldn't. I don't know. Or even a David Hayes style. I know David Hayes retired now. Maybe somebody will rise up through the ranks who is similar to a David Hay in the sense that he's a big punching ambush fighter who's a smaller heavyweight who's fast. Because there's still speculation among people about who would have won that fight. Obviously, right now, people are going to say, the majority are going to say Fury. But there are still some people I've seen in my Facebook boxing group. And by the way, my old group has now been deleted by Facebook. I've got a new Facebook boxing group now. But there are still some people who believe David Hay would have won if they would have fought back in, 2013. So there are different styles that Tyson Fury, I have to see him in with. And not only is there different styles, Tyson Fury is an erratic character. Tyson Fury is a guy throughout his entire career, not just his hiatus after the Klitschko win. No, throughout his entire career, he's been erratic. He's been a guy early on in his career who go out drinking and partying and putting on loads of weight and weight fluctuations up and down. I mean, look at him now. Tyson Fury, wasn't he heavier against Tom Schwartz than he was against Wilder? I mean, he didn't look aesthetically in much better shape against Schwartz than he did against Wilder. His movement was better and he looked physically stronger, but has he been sticking to a diet? I mean, what's his diet like? Tyson Fury is an erratic character. Can somebody so erratic be consistent in their performances over a long period of time? I have my doubts. So there's questions about Tyson Fury. AJ at the moment is in the position Lewis was in when he lost to Oliver McCall. He's been written off by a lot of people. Could AJ come back like Lewis and turn out to be the best heavyweight of this era? I don't know. I've got no idea. I'm intrigued to find out. Then you've got Deontay Wilder, who has got the thinnest resume out of all the top heavyweights. But he's a tremendous puncher. We know that. He can knock a flipping concrete wall down. He's somebody you cannot write off with that kind of punching power and that kind of speed. But he was very close to losing against Tyson Fury. Fury, who was only 60% of himself in that fight. What would happen in a rematch? Would Fury completely school and embarrass Wilder, or would Wilder learn from the first fight, box his way into it, not be so over anxious, and end up knocking Tyson Fury out this time? Is that what would happen? I don't know. So with all these question marks all over the heavyweight division, having learned what I've learned and observed what I've observed about heavyweight boxing throughout the decades, how on earth am I going to tell you guys, oh yeah, I think so-and-so's the best? It's ridiculous, right? Have a bit of patience, because that's what I'm going to. If you guys want to jump the gun, go ahead and jump the gun. I know better than that, being a student of heavyweight boxing. I know that it's best to just wait till the smoke clears. It's going to be a good 4 or 5 years until all these guys fight each other. They all face different styles. They all swap wins and losses. Good 4 or 5 years down the line at least, we'll have a much better idea. And then we can start saying, okay, maybe this guy's the best heavyweight in the division. But at the moment, it's too chaotic, man. It's way too chaotic. So that's my take on it. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about everything I've talked about in this video. It's happening. I'm out.